Welcome back to EXanima. We are going to be getting on to the next episode as soon as I reset my timer. Now, you may have noticed that I got a new timer. That's because EXanima doesn't allow me to minimize very effectively to see the timer that I was previously using, which was a free-to-wear software timer. Now I am currently using the timer on my wristwatch, so we'll see how that goes. Timer, start. And on to the next fight. Your next opponent is this guy. Now, I had pretty much zero problems with this guy. The first time I fought him, I basically one-two'd him into the ground. And that was even before I knew about how to keep the cursor aiming at him, so I was doing that with basically very ineffectively used attacks. I just stepped into him and basically cut his crap up. Now, I think a one-handed weapon with a shield will probably have a bit more difficulty with this guy. As a note, if this guy gets a clean hit on you with his hammer, you are probably going to either A, be dead, or B, be bleeding very, very badly and have about 10% of your health left. That's because he only has an effective hit very rarely, because he can only do it with the very end of his hammer hitting squarely on you. And as you can see, it's very easy to block a two-handed weapon like this as long as you know about the fact that you have to keep your cursor pointed at the weapon. Now, this is also a good time to point out that things like stepping into the opponent's swing is very effective for stopping it. Right there, I did a combination of starting an attack and then stepping into his swing to give my attack a bit more of a chance to complete. Now, of course, you do have to note, when you step into an opponent's attack, you are also stepping your attack in as well. There's a good chance that you're both just going to have your attacks canceled. However, for something like that, where you catch a follow-up, because sometimes your attack won't be so completely interrupted that its follow-up is canceled and that the attack restarts. For instance, if I start something like this, you'll notice that after it hits him, it cancels out doing an opposite direction swing and just starts over with a right to left swing. Typically though, the easiest way to deal with this guy is to just step out of the way and then while beginning an attack, step back in. Now in the novice arena is something to point out. A lot of enemies are very vulnerable to just finishing a combo. In the expert mode, you're going to want to quickly cut that habit out, but in the novice arena down here, if you get a clean hit, hold that button down and try and get another one, because you will very likely get it, because more often than not, enemies in the novice arena respond to being punched by trying to punch you back. Now, this is a very valuable enemy. As a matter of fact, you may want to come through novice mode all the way through, even when you have access to expert mode equipment, just to get this. Because nobody else in novice or expert has an equivalent piece of equipment to this. You can get several different layers on top of this, but this piece right here can only be attained from this character. Also of note, this waistcoat goes on top of your tunic. This chain shirt, tunic, as a matter of fact, you get shirts later. This chain tunic also goes underneath all of your equipment. That is why I mentioned that it is very important that you layer your equipment in this game. Over here, though, we have a pair of boots. They are inferior to the previous pair of boots you got. Always check the pants. The pants are a little variable. Yep, these are not good pants, so we will leave them. I am now wearing his shirt. As a note, suede shoes are important. Hang on to them. I know I already said that, but just underlining it. On to the next fight. Now here we have an enemy who is very tricky sometimes. The first time I faced this enemy, I had a similar effect with the previous one. I literally two-hit her. However, this enemy has more complicated AI. Right there you saw we both stepped into each other's attacks. I'm not doing very well. However, an important thing to note in EXanima, never give up. Not exactly the best evidence there, but you can very often come back with just a sliver of health so long as you start to play carefully. Now, however, we can demonstrate something. One, that the people who make this game really need to make a button minimum press count. An important thing to keep in mind in a game is the minimum number of button presses from the end of one session to the next is very important when you have a defeat scenario. This is far too many buttons in order to start again in the arena. It very quickly will get annoying, especially with a game like this, where you can very easily mess up and lose all of your current progress. Well, what do you know? I got an overhead attack there, and I didn't mean to. I was going for a regular attack. So another criticism for the overhead. You'll notice that I've gotten very silent because I am concentrating right now. This enemy seems to be giving me more trouble than he did the last time. Of course, then he goes for an overhead, which is extraordinarily easy to punish, so... Ooh, yeah, I'm hurt. Yeah, and right there, I was trying to get a left to right. There we go. I got a nice clean hit on his head. Now he's dead. On to the next one. Block, chop. Block, try to chop. Block, chop. Block, chop. Oh, chop too soon. Another important mechanic to note is that when you hit an enemy, it interrupts whatever attacks they may have been trying to get. So oftentimes, if you're knowing what you're doing with your weapon and how your weapon affects your character's balance and how your movements affect your weapon and your balance, you can sort of chain an enemy to death. This enemy in particular is kind of vulnerable to it, but I'm not exactly in a condition where I can afford to try that, because I am about to die to one clean hit. There we go. So an important thing to note is that even if you're not deliberately trying to hit your opponent, even if you don't have the momentum behind the swing to make it super effective, once your weapons are clashing, if you get something, like especially on swords, maybe not so much on other types of weapon like this thing that only has a very small area that it can cause damage, but on swords, if your weapons are clashing, you're probably winning because it's sliding your sword blade around and just gently nicking them in a bunch of different places. Of additional note is that if you hit an enemy's guard hard enough and it caves it in, especially on small shields, to the opponent, and something else catches on your opponent. For instance, if I smack his shield with enough oomph that it gets pushed into his body, and the part of my blade that's either above or below his shield rubs up against his body, it will hurt him. Oh, and there's another thing of note. You must be careful how much weight you put into a swing of your weapon, because if an opponent hits you in the right way while you're doing that, and throws you off balance too hard, your character can fall on the ground and then just be punched in the face. Now, an important thing to note about that, when your opponent falls on the ground like this, the very first thing you do is get into position as close as you can tell with the range of your weapon, and you immediately start and hold the overhead attack. Don't do anything complicated. Try to make this motion, this entire attack technique, as fluid and quick as possible, because you have an extraordinarily small window to effectively get the hit in. Just immediately go for the overhead attack, point it at them, and you only get the one shot, and then immediately resume your guard, because even if it doesn't look like it, their guard is already coming back up. Now, pay attention to it once you've gotten the hit, because you might be able to get a second one if it hits them square enough, or if they're getting up in a certain way and it throws them off balance again. Now right there you'll notice that while I didn't get the effective hit with my sword, I did manage to swing it all the way around from behind him and get behind his guard, and it very gently clipped him. And you'll notice that he's making noise when I do that. That's because I am hurting him. Even though it doesn't seem to be hitting him very hard, it is hurting him. It's always important to be aware of where your weapon is and how off or on balance you are, and whether or not you can follow attacks up. Alright, and he's dead. Like I said, it's maybe a little difficult to explain things as they're happening in this game because of how fluid the combat is. But against this enemy, just getting attacks in after he attacks because of his weapons, extraordinarily, humongously poor balance. Look at that. That is got to be some of the worst balance in the game. Now, grant, he gets a lot of damage in, If he can manage to correctly hit you with the correct part of his weapon, it will pretty much end you, but his weight and his balance are horribly maxed and min. Now, on the other hand, I have a pretty great time against this guy because I go for the two-handed swords, which have immense balance. The important thing about balance that you may remember from when I did the reading of the Quick Start tutorial is that balance determines how quickly this happens. How quickly you can follow one attack with the other, and kind of as a side effect, how easily a weapon throws you off balance. A low balance weapon is not necessarily always. This is primarily determined by the weight of your weapon, but a low balance, high weight weapon will throw you off balance like crazy. A high balance, low weight weapon will pretty much never do it. So you can literally just keep swinging over and over and over again, and your character is very unlikely to ever throw off balance, outside of your enemy also contributing to the equation. Now, I'm using a two-handed version, so this isn't as effectively applied to me, but I do want to note that for a very long time in the arena, I got away with a technique I like to call 1-stop-2. And what that is you do one swing, stop, and then immediately go for the opposite direction. The mechanics in play, as far as I can tell on this, is every time your character attempts to assume his default standard position, it gives an immense bonus to his ability to recover both his balance and his stance. Now, balance is primarily a thing applied to how quickly your weapon can be swung around, but when I say stance, I mean how likely your character is to fall on his face, and also how easily he'll be able to move in a particular direction at a particular time without contributing to falling on his face. Now, to resume what I was talking about, the 1-stop-2, by going for an attack and completing it, or canceling it and then stopping, that stopping is very important. Now, regardless of whether or not you actually effectively block an attack that your enemy is doing, you go for a feint and get him to attack you, or you just get a smack on the enemy, once you try to resume a default position, a guarded position, a proper high stance position that's difficult to be knocked off balance, regardless of whether you complete that, for the game's mechanics, it seems to give you a huge bonus. It will make this attack come out much faster sometimes if you go for the one attack, stop, and then immediately go for the second attack. Now, it may not look like I've actually stopped when I'm doing that, but I am. Now, let me show you what happens if I just do this. It's probably really hard to see, but if I'm doing weight into my swings, especially if I'm moving, I'm getting much more off balance. You'll notice he took an extra step forward there that I didn't tell him to. Let me just get back in position. Now, if I do the same thing, I am not as far off balance. Let me go ahead and try that with a completed swing. Yeah. Okay, so right there, I actually was trying to get what I was pointing out. Because your character is always pointing at the cursor, oftentimes it is constantly adjusting the value required to get a left to right swing. So just a recap of that. But if I go for the swing, stop, and then go for the opposite swing, well, okay, so like I said, this combat is very fluid. It's very difficult to get things to happen when you want them to. Now, I missed there, but that's something that is very effectively applicable to this enemy. Just once you see them taking a swing at you, if you've got a nice long weapon, take a step back while they're doing so, and then go in for a swing. Now, you'll see right there, I immediately went for the overhead, but I missed. However, you'll notice that she was already pretty much on her feet again as my attack was completed. She got a clip on me. Oh, I was about to say if that had hit her, it would have ended the fight. But hey, I just pointed that out because it already did end the fight as soon as it happened the second time. Now, this is a very valuable enemy no matter what you're wielding. 1, replacement upgrade. This has a coverage of 3 with a slash of 1. This has a whole bunch of different miscellaneous defense values. Don't bother caring about that half coverage point. This is much better than this, and it's also about the only thing you're going to get for a very long time until you step into the expert arena. Right here, we have a pair of boots. Oh no, I forgot to pick up the suede shoes. Darn. However, these boots are an upgrade to our current boots. You lose a little bit in crush, but they have better defense values and everything else. So, away with those. Next, we have our first wrist guards. And of course, all shirts being equal, this is now the shirt of the next highest opponent I have made a record for beating. Over here, I believe we have a pair of pants that might be an upgrade if you forgot to pick up these. But I have these, so we're not going to be wearing those. Alright, time to move on to the next fight. Of course, I've taken this shield, but I don't really have any intent to use it. It is probably an upgrade to whatever shield you were previously using as that wood buckler. Now here is an enemy that is extraordinarily valuable if you, like me, choose to take on the two-handed sword. His sword is a little bit longer and just all around completely better than the one you start with. Now when you're fighting this enemy, know that you are probably not going to as likely get a hit with a block smack technique. He will constantly have his guard back up after swing. Now that's not to say that you can never do that. You do still want to be going for that a lot of times to making a shot for it. Because sometimes you will get a partial clip or a full hit. It's just, this is the first enemy where it's going to really sink into you that you're not going to be able to use that as much later in the game. You're going to have to be finding new techniques for getting around an opponent's guard than just waiting for them to do something and then blocking. Now right there, I chose not to resume a defensive position. I swung once, and then when I saw him coming for a swing, I simply stepped back out of it while still holding the mouse down so that my next swing would be coming out. So to re-emulate it, I swung. I noticed that he was going for a swing, so I stepped back to avoid it while still holding down the mouse to allow my second swing to come back in. So something to comment about. About one of my previous techniques that I was telling you about, the one stop two, is that does technically slow down how fast that second attack comes out. It just makes that second attack much more consistent, and it also gives you a better position for your balance of your weapon and your stance with your feet and your character. Now, as far as loot goes, obviously if you're using a two-handed sword, you pick this up, you use it. Don't mind the impact, that is absolutely not important in the novice arena, but you put this sucker on now. It has better balance, it has better slash, it has better thrust. That's probably not ever going to happen, but it also has, if I can line up the windows here with a pixel perfect line, literally less weight and a longer reach. Yeah, go figure. It has a longer, it has a wider guard. That does matter sometimes, I find. And it's got less weight. That's just a ridiculous improvement. Now, over here we've got our first pair of gauntlets. Gauntlets are different than braces. They can go on underneath them. We also have our first belt. As far as I can tell, all belts in the game are exactly the same. Once you pick up your first belt, you don't have to care about taking anything else. Obviously, I'm going to take the next highest tier of enemy I've defeated shirt. Now, point of note. This enemy has the best leather tunic in the game in both Novice and Expert Arena. You take it, you put it on, you never take it off. Just telling you, do that. Now, because I forgot to take a pair of shoes with me, the suede shoes, which are the best in the game, I'm going to have to go ahead and take these shoes with me instead, because I'm very soon, if I win, going to be getting an upgrade that replaces my ability to wear these. On to the next fight. Meet the mini-boss. This is an enemy who has a high-balanced weapon in one hand with a shield to back it up. Now, right there, I made use of the length of my weapon and that technique that I just previewed in the previous fight, holding down the attack inside and stepping out of the opponent's reach to allow you to continue your attack. Now, as you can see, I'm getting cut to pieces. That's because this enemy is very balanced and also is equipped with some higher level AI. She will very, very, very infrequently just expose herself to you. You're going to be, more often than not, the fight right here where you're trying to learn the more unusual techniques for getting around an opponent's guard, like stepping around, getting your weapon to swing a little bit sooner into your opponent than theirs gets into you, such as stepping in certain ways based on the way that your weapon is swinging. Ah, and she got me. I came into this fight with far too little HP. However, so long as I don't quit the game and I keep trying, I come back with all of my equipment So I am much better equipped to deal with all of the enemies come the previous. Oh, thought he was going to hit the ground there. Alright, that takes care of him. Now, what I was trying to talk about before she finished me off there is stepping like this into a swing, or stepping like this into a swing, increases how quickly the blade will come to beat your opponent. Now, more often than not, because it will have the cursor off to the side of an opponent, it won't hit. Now, more often than not, because it will have the cursor off to the and be not direct. Like I'm not sure if this is deliberate. It will consider the blow as to set up the mechanics, but whether or not your cursor is pointing at your enemy or just a side effect of how they're currently worth at least 50% of whether or not the game considers it a direct impact or not. So when you're doing something like this, your swings get into the opponent faster, you're not going to get as much damage, but because you're getting it to happen faster, you're going to be more likely to get it than it might otherwise not have. So you're trading damage for consistency, basically. Now then, that's it for this current set of episodes. Hope you all enjoyed. Probably pretty rambly, but there's not a humongous lot I can do about that due to the nature of the game. I'll see you soon when I get back to where I was previously. In the meantime, you have a great day. Bye-bye.